hope for healing. Nearly a month after the Baltimore riots, we revisit the city.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight.
Iraq's strategy. The White House faces questions after blunt comments by the defense secretary. Devotion to Mary. We talk with a Marian expert in this final week of Our Lady's month of May. And petals from heaven. We show you a beautiful Roman tradition for the Feast of Pentecost. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 26th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. A month has now passed since riots erupted after the funeral of a young man fatally injured while in police custody. Jason Calvi returns to Baltimore tonight to update the long healing process. Jason?
Brian, this is one of the hardest hit areas in Baltimore. You can still see the windows here at the CVS pharmacy are still boarded up. It's been a deadly month for Baltimore. 35 murders this month alone, with 8 happening over this holiday weekend. The deadliest month so far since 1999. So a Catholic bishop is taking to the streets tonight, praying for peace.
Most of the news cameras have left and most of the speech making has stopped. And we feel now is a time to signal that it's a time for structural change. It's a time for significant changes in what's going on in that area with regard to education, healthcare, employment, and so on.
Bishop Madden and others will walk through Freddie Gray's neighborhood and ask God to bless it. Across town, Catholic leaders at America's First Cathedral have the same message: pray for peace. A message lived out by Catholic convert Wendy Stewart, who lives close to some of the looted stores.
Prayers need to be said, not just for people who have suffered, but the people who feel like they're suffering and the people who were looting and committing acts of violence. They need prayer as well, because God's mercy is for everyone.
And as those prayers go up, it's back to business as usual for Dinkins Dry Cleaners. The busted windows are gone, and manager Willie Weathers is hopeful.
It seems like everybody's pulling together. I mean, the people in the neighborhood were saying that, it's a shame that my business, as well as the businesses across the street, were affected. It's an inconvenience for them, and I think now they realize how important those businesses are to them.
Weathers' business is located near the neighborhood where most of the rioting took place.
It's right here in the Sandtown neighborhood where Bishop Madden's going to take to the streets in prayer. They're going to stop at several sites offering Bible readings, hymns, and prayers. Brian?
Jason Calvi in Baltimore. Thank you, Jason. And some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. 30 people are still missing tonight after flooding ravages central Texas. Among the missing are 12 people whose vacation home was swept away by the flooded Blanco River. 11 people are now confirmed dead from storms in Oklahoma and Texas. In Houston, there were hundreds of water rescues overnight, mostly of people stranded in cars. Iraq launches an offensive against the Islamic State, trying to recapture critical territory west of Baghdad. This comes 2 days after Defense Secretary Ash Carter publicly criticized the Iraqi military's commitment. Susanne LaFrankie is here with more tonight.
It's proving quite to be an embarrassment for the White House tonight, Brian. The Obama administration is downplaying the significance of its own defense secretary's criticism of Iraqi forces. They say they've already responded to demands by Iraqi fighters for more powerful weapons, and they stress the increase in military aid doesn't mean they're changing their strategy against ISIS. Speaking at the end of a meeting with the NATO secretary, the president defended his strategy to fight the Islamic State.
We continue to coordinate effectively in the fight against ISIL.
U.S. attention to supplying higher-grade military equipment came after Ash Carter criticized Iraqi forces.
The Iraqi forces just showed no will to fight.
The loss of Ramadi is a major defeat for Iraqi troops. They had been making steady progress against extremists with the help of U.S.-led airstrikes. Carter said the Iraqi forces fled the advance of the Islamic State on the city without fighting back. They left behind weapons and vehicles for the extremists.
They were not outnumbered. In fact, they vastly outnumbered the opposing force. We have an issue with the will of the Iraqis to fight ISIL and defend themselves.
In the wake of the ISIS victory, some lawmakers have called for more American forces on the ground. But the Obama administration says it won't send U.S. troops to the region.
For enduring sustainable results, we're going to need to see the Iraqi people, the Iraqi government, and the Iraqi security forces step up.
The White House also defended Carter's remarks. They say the Iraqi government acknowledged the setback was the result of a breakdown in command and planning, and that the Iraqi forces did not have the proper U.S. or allied training. Brian?
Thanks, Suzanne. Ireland's constitution will be rewritten to redefine marriage. Ireland becomes the first nation to approve the redefinition of marriage by popular vote. Opponents remain outspoken.
I suppose there were a lot of no voters that were afraid to express their concerns because they were called names, they felt intimidated, and so we could that silent vote couldn't be established. But look, I just want to congratulate the yes side. The people have spoken, and our concerns remain legitimate.
Irish lawmakers are now expected to pass a bill legalizing marriage between same-sex couples. We're being joined by Skype from Dublin, Ireland, by trial attorney Benedict O'Flynn. Ben, it's good to have you back with us. What is the reaction since the referendum passed this weekend?
Well, it's been a remarkable couple of days, Brian. The initial reaction was obviously those who succeeded in this change, euphoria, disappointment on the part of the nearly 40% who voted against it, and strikingly, plans being announced by the government to press on with further constitutional change.
So what legal issues does this present now that this has passed?
Well, there's going to be obviously the accommodation now by new legislation of this gender-neutral form of marriage. That's going to take some time to bed down. There are a raft of issues that the government accept have to be changed, others that they don't accept have to be changed. Surrogacy is something that they've promised they'll deal with in the coming months, and that's going to assume a new urgency now with these changes.
Ben, this is a major change in the Constitution. What other issues does this open the door to?
Well, remarkably, Brian, within 24 hours of the result becoming known, the government clearly sensed that they were able to press on with other constitutional change, and they announced immediately plans to delete the protection of the unborn from the Constitution, and they're hoping to get a mandate for that in the next general election. So they clearly, as I say, sensed that the opposition to this change was sufficiently low that they could try and press forward to those other changes.
So do you see this as a lost battle, or is there any recourse?
Difficult to say. Change to the Constitution is a very difficult thing to reverse. The change has been made for the foreseeable future. I think whatever legal difficulties are thrown up by it, we'll just have to work our best around those.
Well, certainly prayer continues to work, and I know that many around the world are praying for the people of Ireland. We thank you for giving us the insight that you've shared with us. Ben O'Flynn joining us from Dublin by Skype. Thank you, Ben.
Always happy, Brian.
And here in Washington, we have Dr. Ryan Anderson, who writes about marriage and religious liberty for the Heritage Foundation. Ryan, how did this Yes campaign garner such support for this?
You know, it looks like that almost all of the elites in Ireland were in favor of redefining marriage, whether it was media elite, academic elites, even political elites. Very few, if any, politicians, certainly no political party in Ireland, stood behind the truth about marriage. So it's remarkable that still about 40% of the citizens voted to defend the truth about marriage. When you have no money, you have no political support, you have no academic support, no media support, where you're just on your own defending the truth, it's remarkable that we still had 40% support the truth on this.
Yeah, there were volunteers mainly on the no side. So do you see this influencing at all the debate on marriage here in the United States?
Well, it certainly should. This should send a signal that we shouldn't have the court prevent us from doing what Ireland has done, having a national discussion and then settling this democratically. If anything, this should send a signal that we don't want unelected judges removing an issue of important public policy like the very meaning and purpose and nature of marriage from the democratic domain. We don't need to have this short-circuited. Ireland shows us the way forward.
In fact, haven't many states already put this to a vote?
We've seen that there have been, I think it's something like 30 states have decided this issue. They've either had their state legislature or directly their people go to the ballot box. They've had a national discussion, a state discussion. They then went and they voted. The question now is, why would we want to throw out those votes? You know, the first right that we have as citizens is the right to vote about important policy, such as the nature of marriage.
So this is troubling to a lot of us to see this go this way. Is there anything that we can do about it to influence the future of this trend that we seem to see?
Sure. What we saw in Ireland was that, as you pointed out, it was largely volunteers who were leading this effort to defend the truth about marriage. They were making the argument about what marriage is, why marriage matters, and why we shouldn't have the government redefining marriage. You know, we need to be making the case that marriage exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife, so that children will have both a mother and a father. And in the American context, I think our main message should be that the court doesn't know any better than you and I do about the nature of marriage. The Constitution is silent about what marriage is. And so people like you and me, we should be discussing, debating, and then voting about marriage.
I find it interesting that you have written a book about the future of marriage and religious liberty in our country. How do you see it in the future?
Well, you know, my book will come out about 2 weeks after the court's decision. The only thing that's left to be written is the chapter about the court's decision itself, because we have to wait and see. But the truth about marriage, the truth about religious liberty doesn't change.
Truth never changes.
Truth never changes. And so this book is largely a roadmap on how do we defend the truth about marriage, the truth about religious liberty, the truth about the family, and the truth about the government's role in supporting marriage and supporting religious liberty going forward.
The Future of Marriage and Religious Liberty is Dr. Ryan Anderson's newest book. You can pre-order it now through Amazon, and it will be out in bookstores before the end of the summer, I'm assuming.
That's right.
Dr. Anderson, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, Archbishop Oscar Romero is beatified in his native San Salvador 35 years after his assassination. People from across El Salvador, many of them bussed in from the countryside, attended the ceremony. The Vatican's Cardinal Angelo Amato presided at the Mass. Cardinal Amato going on to say that Blessed Romero belongs to the mighty wind of holiness blowing over the American continent. A relic of the shirt worn by Archbishop Romero when he was killed was on display during Mass. Many in El Salvador see the beatification as a turning point for the country. This woman saying it's a moment of reconciliation, to forgive the past and begin a new life with faith and a lot of hope. Romero's killer has never been identified and no one has been prosecuted for the crime. Beatification is the final step towards sainthood. And something quite spectacular, some might even say miraculous, marked that special moment in San Salvador. A Vatican official known as Tweeting Priest Online shared this picture from the ceremony. He writes, "Solar halo occurred at the exact moment Cardinal Amato had finished reading the proclamation of beatification. Hashtag Romero." Coming up, Pope Francis urges Franciscans to be true to their founder. It's Tuesday, May 26th, the feast of St. Philip Neri. He was a priest of Rome, a renowned pastor and confessor. He cared especially for the poor children of the city. The 500th anniversary of his birth is July 15th of this year. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis welcomes Franciscans to the Vatican. These religious are gathered for the meeting of their order, the Friars Minor. Francis invites them to be bringers of mercy, reconciliation, and peace, staying true to their founder. The Holy Father, who is a Jesuit, has a special connection to the order. He is the first pope to take the name of Francis for St. Francis of Assisi. And a very personal interview with Pope Francis gives us some insight into his everyday life. Alan Holdren joining us from Rome to talk about the interview with an Argentine newspaper. Alan, just give us some of the highlights.
Well, Brian, Pope Francis, in this interview that he gave to a personal family friend from Argentina, it lasted 45 minutes. He spoke about some of the more personal elements of his life. He said that he only sleeps 6 hours a night. He wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He also doesn't watch television. That's a promise he made to Our Lady back in 1990. For the last 25 years, he hasn't been watching television. He also doesn't use the internet. And he said that he is a man that likes to live on the streets. He's a city dweller, he said. His heart is on the streets, and the one thing he wants to do that he can't is go out for a pizza.
So, Alan, Francis usually wears a pretty big smile, but there's another side of him that we seldom see, isn't there?
Well, he spoke about the dramatic situations that he hears about routinely that often cause him to become emotional. He spoke in particular about visiting inmates in jails He spoke about boat migrants in Asia, persecuted Christians in the Middle East. He said all of these things make him want to cry, but he cries on the inside when he's in public. He said that he's let a tear or two fly while he is in public, but he's just played it off, he said. So he doesn't like to show that side, but he did say that it exists. Brian?
All right, Alan Holdred in Rome, thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, you can't have both heaven and earth. That message from Pope Francis in today's homily. The Holy Father says a Christian cannot be attached to earthly things. Francis says those Christians are limping because they don't know what they want. He reminds us to make a radical choice, warning we can't be half Christian. The Archdiocese of Denver now joins a growing movement to confirm children before they receive First Holy Communion. Known as the Restored Order, Denver is the 10th U.S. diocese to return the sacraments to the order they were in before the 20th century. Archbishop Samuel Aquila also made this change 13 years ago as Bishop of Fargo. The Diocese of Honolulu also recently returned to the Restored Order. We're honored to have Archbishop Samuel Aquila joining us by Skype from Denver. Archbishop, explain very briefly how and when was the confirmation sacrament moved behind First Communion?
It was moved behind in 1910 by St. Pius X when he moved the sacrament of the Eucharist to the age of 7. And perhaps he thought it was going to follow, but it did not. And so it was all over the place at that point in time.
So why are you now rearranging this in Denver as you had in Fargo when you were bishop there?
The reason I'm rearranging it is to help people understand the true meaning of confirmation, that it completes baptism, to follow the rite of Christian initiation of adults, which calls for children from the age of 7 forward to be baptized, confirmed, and receive Eucharist all at the same time. And so baptism and confirmation are directed to the Eucharist, and the Eucharist completes the sacraments of initiation.
Very interesting. Many have seen confirmation as a sacrament of maturity. Do you think the younger children will understand it?
I believe, first of all, that understanding is erroneous. It is not a sacrament of maturity in terms of physical maturity, but spiritual. And certainly children, as we have seen in the Middle East and in Africa, have given witness to their faith, and very young children. Just recently in terms of giving their lives for Christ. And so it's important to restore a true understanding of the sacrament of confirmation.
It will be interesting to see if others follow this direction. Archbishop Samuel Aquila, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome, and wonderful being with you. God bless you all.
Up next, hundreds of horses return to this vacation destination as it gears up for the summer crowd. And we take you to the Pantheon for a magical sight. We can observe the fourth commandment by loving visits to our aging grandparents. That reminder from Pope Francis on his Twitter account about honoring our father and our mother and all of our ancestors. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Pope Francis will not visit Medjugorje during a one-day trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina next weekend. Medjugorje has been a pilgrimage destination since 6 people claimed to see Our Lady there beginning in 1991. The Vatican has not confirmed these reported apparitions. Our Catherine Szeltner spoke about this earlier with a Marian expert.
Michael, how should Catholics approach Marian apparitions not approved by the Vatican?
Well, it's very interesting because if you go throughout history, places like Lourdes and Fatima, they only became approved apparitions because of the groundswell of support for these apparitions. But it's really important that Catholics don't get too obsessed with apparitions and they focus on the ones that have really been approved by the Church.
So how significant is it that Pope Francis won't be stopping by Medjugorje on his trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina next weekend?
Yeah, the internet's buzzing a little bit, saying maybe that's the death knell of Medjugorje, meaning that if the Pope isn't even going to stop there when he's right next door, what does it mean? But throughout history, there have been several ways that the Church approves apparitions. They've given official statements, they've given feast days, they've canonized visionaries. One of the ways is a Pope actually stopping by an apparition site. So if he were to actually walk on the apparition site, that would be equivalent to an approval of some sort. So they're being very careful about that.
So Michael, as an expert on Marian apparitions, I'm curious, are there any recent cases that have been catching your attention?
Well, it's interesting. If you go to my website, miraclehunter.com, I catalog about 2,500 apparitions. And one of the most popular parts of the website is the part where it shows the approval status of all the apparitions. But one of the ones that's very interesting that has a letter is one from Itaporanga, Brazil, that's deep in the Amazon. This fellow named Edson Glauber, he's a young man. He received some apparitions, and the bishop has actually approved them while they're still going on, which is a really unique thing. Normally, the church waits until they're finished. So I'm really interested to see how that one progresses.
And this entire month of May is dedicated to Mary. But how does the church honor our mother year-round?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people take part in Marian processions and pilgrimages and May crownings this month. But when I wrote my book, 365 Days with Mary, I learned that throughout the year, there are devotions and commemorations each and every day somewhere in the world. So many local places have Marian celebrations and feast days throughout the entire year.
Well, Michael, thank you for sharing your insight with us. It's great to speak with you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Catherine and Michael. Well, summer is just around the corner, and one Midwestern hotspot is gearing up for it. Susie Pinto reports.
Mackinac Island is not a one-horse town, not even close.
There's right around 500 horses on the island total in the summertime.
But first they have to get here. Once the ice is cleared from the Straits of Mackinac in the spring, the horses come over about 12 at a time. It's a process that runs into June. Most of the horses spend their winters on the mainland, such as the Chambers Farm in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. They supply the animals to carriage tours, the biggest horse and buggy service on the island. From the farm, workers have a job to do.
Truck them to St. Ignace, take them off the truck, load them onto the Huron, which is the freight boat for Arnold Line, and bring them over. We send guys down to the boat to pick them up, usually tie 3 or 4 together, lead them up here to the barn.
Then they're prepped and sent off to their assigned tasks. Cars aren't allowed on the island, so Michigan's premier warm weather destination relies on its equine friends to serve as taxis, cargo haulers, even package deliverers. They do pretty much all of the heavy lifting in town. It's all part of an annual rite of spring when Mackinac becomes a 500-horse town. Susie Pinto, EWTN News Nightly.
What a great spot to spend your summer vacation. Well, this weekend in Rome, a beautiful Pentecost tradition returns. At the Pantheon, rose petals are dropped through the opening of this famous church. Those petals symbolize the flame of the Holy Spirit descending on Mary and the apostles at Pentecost. This tradition dates back centuries, and people attending this special Mass get to take these sweet-smelling petals home with them. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. As we leave you tonight, we look back at Sunday's celebrations of Pentecost. Good night, and may God bless you.